And I said, well, like, do you drink hot chocolate? He said, yeah, I drink. I said, well, what if I bought you a hot chocolate and we sat at the table? He said, yeah. He said, but I don't really feel like a hot chocolate right now. I said, would your morals be offended if I bought you a hot chocolate and you just let that sit on the table since you do drink hot chocolate? Oh, he said, no, I guess that'd be all right, So we go into Tim Hortons and we buy hot chocolates for all. None of us drink them. They all sit on the table, and Ron and Alex continue their conversation about life in the hard scrabble frozen streets of Montreal. How the cops come around at this hour of every day, you've got to watch out for these guys and blah, blah, blah. I've really got nothing to offer, waiting for my tour of Old Montreal. I never got to Old Montreal. At some point during the conversation, which, as I said, is almost entirely about how to survive on the street of Montreal, and with no reference to anything. He'd been introduced to me and he knew my name, but he didn't even know if we were Christians or what we were or why we were there. He turns to me and fixes me with his gaze. And out of the blue, he says to me, so who do you think God is? Now, this might seem like an unusual thing to happen to me, but I just happen to have these kind of fingerprints of the Holy Spirit on me, and occasionally things like that actually do happen to me, so it's not that bizarre for me. So I said, who do I think God is? Oh, I said, I think God is warmth. I think God is security. I think God is hope. I think God is peace. I think God is love. I said, I'm sure of these things because Jesus came and said, look, if you want to know what the Father is like, look at me. And I said, you want to know something? Jesus was homeless. Jesus was starving. Jesus gathered with those of the street who were most lost and most abandoned and found and created home and hospitality among them. So I said, that's who I think God is. And tears welled up in his eyes and he said, well, why the effing hell don't all these evangelists that walk up and down this street talk about God like that? And he proceeded to tell me that this was like the street for street preaching evangelists and groups of kind of Christians to wander up and down. He says, and they had out these little brochures, he called them. I didn't want to tell him they actually tracts, brochures, sound as good as anything. They hand out all these brochures about God and Jesus. And he said, you know what they're all about? He said, because I've been looking at them. I try and read them. I take them back to my squat and I sit around like my little radiator and I try and read them. And he said, I don't even know what they're talking about. I mean, that doesn't even make sense to me. They're about like Jehoshaphat and Jehuzi-What's-it, and it's all like some weird language. I don't get it. I don't understand it. It makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. And they come up and down this street all the time, and they say this stuff to us, and on they keep going. I don't even know what they're talking about. And I'm sitting here in Tim Hortons looking out the picture window at this magnificent Catholic church with this huge spire and this cross on top of it, and I think to myself, well, if this isn't the ultimate expression of living in a kind of post-Christian culture, what is? Because here I am in a city that's like basically built on Christian wealth. Here I am with a kind of floating neon cross hovering above us all, and here is a guy who's been given kind of tracts by evangelists that he doesn't even understand. And what's more, he then goes on to tell us later on when Ron's asking him how he heats himself and whether the little radiator is warm enough for him in minus 20 or 30 on the really cold days. He says, actually one day the neighbours figured out that I was stealing their electricity and they cut me off. And he said, and I was in my squat, almost frozen to death. I was burning anything I could just to create a bit of heat. And he said at one point, he said, I'm burning newspapers and rubbish and the wooden planks that I'd built this little platform out of just to stay warm. He said, at one point, he said, I even pulled out all those brochures that those Christian evangelists had given me, and I thought about whether I should burn those, but I just couldn't bring myself to. I said, what? He said, I just couldn't bring myself to burn them. He said, I keep them under my pillow. And I thought to myself, now that is the icing on the cake, don't you think? They've got no idea what all these buildings and crosses and all that kind of stuff mean. They can't even understand the words in this tract. It just bears no resemblance to the world in which they live. But somehow, deep inside the kind of soul of this kid, there's something sacred and spectacular and real and something which is absolutely not to be burnt about whatever this thing, whatever truth might be contained in this stuff, even though it might as well be written in Swahili. My friends, that is our situation in a parable, is it not? That is the world in which you live every day. All the remnants of Christendom are still around us. The buildings, the programs, the big organisations, the denominational structures, it's all still there, hovering over us like a neon cross. While we're around us, starving and freezing, making no sense whatever of the gospel as we communicate it to them, but daring to hold on to the possibility that maybe there's something true and rich and real and sacred about this gospel that these people talk about. Does this make sense to you? And listen, to me it's not just highfalutin ideas about postmodernity or the end of Christendom. To me it's about guys like Alex. To me it's about people who cannot find hope in the conventional structures of Christendom, who won't come to our churches, who can't understand our tracts or our televangelists, but who somehow, somewhere, deep down in the very depths of their soul, believe that there's got to be something to it. You know why I think everyone goes in for the Da Vinci Code? I reckon they go in for it because they have to believe maybe there's more to this whole Jesus thing than the churches have been telling us all these years. Because if Jesus is as amazing as they say he is, how could this be the result? Are you with me? It's already been explained to us what some of the kind of symptoms of this kind of breakdown of the Christendom world might be. So what is it that Christendom offers for us? Well, I actually want to suggest to you that post-Christendom creates the cultural conditions, not for the discovery necessarily of new theologies, of new practices, of new strategies, but rather for the rediscovery of the biblical God who we had conveniently forgotten. I actually am thankful for the loss of Christendom. How about you? I mean, grieve it, mourn it, give it a nice big celebration, send it off, let's have a funeral service. But what it does for us is this. It maybe creates the conditions where those of us who are serious about wanting to represent Christ in post-Christendom might be forced to discover something about our God and our world and ourselves that we might never have been able to understand had we remained back in the safety and the cocoon of Christendom. Just like Israel in the exile. In the exile, abandoned and taken to Babylon, it's there that the Jews discover something about God and themselves they could never have discovered while back in Jerusalem in the safety of the city with the temple on the hill. When it was all gone, then and only then could they discover the magnificence of Yahweh and the God that they had conveniently forgotten all along. There's a quote by John Douglas Hall talking about the end of Christendom, and I agree strongly with this. He says, if we once have the courage to give up our defence of all the old facades, which have nothing or very little behind them, if we cease to maintain in public the pretense of a universal Christendom, if we stop straining every nerve to get everybody baptised, to get everybody married in church and onto our registers, even when success means only at bottom a victory for tradition and custom and ancestry, not for true faith or interior conviction. If by letting go we visibly relieve Christianity of the burdensome impression that it accepts responsibility for everything that goes on under this Christian top dressing, the impression that Christianity is some sort of every man's religious varnish, a folk religion at the same level of folk costumes. If we could do all that, then we can be free for real missionary adventure and apostolic self-confidence. Do you believe it? Do you believe that once it's all come tumbling down, that then and only then might we be prepared to open our eyes to the God who'd always been there, to rediscover our identity as it is always intended to be. That maybe we don't stand on the cusp of the end of everything. Maybe we stand on the cusp of the beginning of